Can I request to just display the introductory CV of our first speaker of the day? Okay.
Uh, Excuse me, ma'am, there is a technical glitch. You can introduce the first speaker and then go ahead.
Okay, fine. So Dr. Anu K. Vasu, she is a consultant pediatric liver transplant physician, pediatric hepatologist, and a gastroenterologist, currently associated with KIMS Health, Thiruvananthapuram. She is trained in pediatric inborn error of metabolism at Avnia Hospital, London, and formerly an associate consultant at Dr. Reela Institute and Medical Center. She brings rich clinical and academic expertise. Her key area of interest includes liver transplantation, pediatric metabolism and liver diseases, pediatric IBD, and small bowel transplantation. She is an award winning researcher, a recipient of Best Young Research Award by the Society of Pediatric Liver Transplantation and Best Research Paper Award by the International Liver Transplant Society. With multiple publications in journals, editorial, and executive board memberships in leading organizations, she continues to contribute significantly to the field. I now invite Dr. Anu to start the session on Golden Window of Nutrition, What Evidence Says. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Yeah, I'm trying to do the slide sharing. Allowed to share screen. Is it coming or?
No, ma'am, not yet.
So I just have to click the green button. No, screen share. Allow to share screen. I think what is happening. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
I think it shows like you are screen sharing, but
Ma'am, you will
And
have
did you
this is coming
stop?
when I'm
to
choosing.
select the entire screen. Just select the entire. Stop sharing and then select the entire screen.
Stop share.
And then when you see the share, just select the entire screen.
I'm just
The first
coming
option.
when I select. क्या डॉक्टर बोलिए ना तो पता सब
So is it visible now at any case?
It is visible now, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity to meet all the vibrant clinical nutritionists across the country on this occasion of World Health Day. So I especially thank Dr. Priya and organizers for this opportunity as well. So when I was looking at the World Health Day theme 2026, is it visible and audible now?
Yes, ma'am, you are visible and audible both.
Yeah, sure. So the World Health Day theme of 2026 is together for health and stand with science. So I thought about looking into few recent literatures which says about maybe how the early nutrition, how the nutrition early life program us for our later neurodevelopmental profile. So I thought about the golden window of nutrition. You very well know that the golden window of nutrition starts from the very first of conception, and initially we used to say it's around first 1,000 days. That means from conception up to 2 years of life. But now we are not just saying for the 1,000 days, but now we are looking towards first 2,000 days, as we identified the nutrition in the early life is very important, and optimal nutrition in this period lays the foundation for future health. And it has role in defining cognitive ability, educational attainment, adult health and productivity, and adverse factors such as low birth weight and poor nutrition can have definitely long-term developmental deficits. So I was literally just telling my son, who is a very maybe kind of a 8 years old only, not to have any junk foods or processed food from outside. He was telling me, okay, they have clearly given the calorie and protein and fat contents on those kind of foods which you buy from outside. So what is the problem in having the food? So at this point in such a very rapidly growing era of technology, we need to speak with evidences. So we definitely needs to have a foundation for the practice which we are having. So because of that, I just thought about looking into very recently published few of literature, how this helps in identifying the optimal nutritional practice. Okay, so the developmental origin of health and diseases theory. The theory has been coming to picture for quite some time, as you all know. So this is a very interesting concept, basically. So this theory speaks about how nutrient exposure helps in metabolic programming and how it has an effect on long-term neurometabolic diseases in our life. So this is the paper which is published in 2018, mainly from Canada. And they have looked into all the review of literatures and came up with a theory of developmental origin of heart and health and disease. So what they find out is maternal obesity and diabetes during pregnancy leads to altered fetal growth and development. Why it is happening or how it is happening? So the answer is it is through mainly epigenetic mechanisms. So when a fetus who is in the mother's womb in early intrauterine exposure, when they have exposed to higher glucose, higher calories, and higher proteins, and not just of over calories or over glucose, and also the poor nutritional exposure leads to a lot of epigenetic mutations in their genes, and this may transmit into future generations, and this can cause an impact on growth, organ development, and ultimately cardiometabolic disease progression in later life. So again, the same concept, the 2018, the paper which has been published mainly of a theoretical basis, and again in 2023, the same concept has been reviewed, and this is a publication from China, which they have done research on various animal models to prove this concept. So they have found out that intrauterine metabolic perturbations like exposure to high glucose and high protein and high energy, definitely obesity, diabetes, and also undernutrition during pregnancy has a profound impact on organogenesis and long-term cardiometabolic health. So this alteration in nutritional milieu can affect mitochondrial function, and it can also serve as a signaling molecules, and it can modulate the gene expression through the same mechanisms which have been spoken, like DNA methylation, histone modifications, and microRNA
Ma'am, not audible. You are not. You are on mute, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute, ma'am. Can you hear us? Dr. Anu, ma'am, you are on mute.
Hello, is it audible now?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'm very sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
So I was mute from the very beginning, or just now it's gone
Just
mute?
now, just now.
Just now. Okay, sorry, I
Like
don't know.
after the
Yeah.
maternal slide, maternal nutrition concerns.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So yeah, so I think this study how we have gone through, no, the research on yeah, maybe I'll just start from here. So is it audible now? Hello?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible now.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Sorry for the inconvenience. So yeah, so we are talking about the nutritional exposure in early life, especially when intrauterine life, and how does it affects the future health of children. So yeah, so this is a very recent study published in 2023 from China. So they have looked through definitely into research into various animal models, as human research is a bit difficult when we are looking at the intrauterine growth and the fetus growth and fetus epigenetic mutation. So they have various studies, various animal studies, which they have proven very well that obesity, diabetes, and undernutrition during pregnancy has an impact on long-term cardiometabolic health. How does it happen is the alteration in the nutritional milieu in the intrauterine period. When fetuses are exposed to high glucose, high protein, and high calorie contents, it may affect the mitochondrial function, and also it can serve as a signaling molecule that directly modulate gene expression through various mechanisms like epigenetic changes like DNA methylation and histone modifications and microRNA expressions. So all exposure to this kind of high nutrient exposures or undernutrition, they can have a functional and structural changes in their cardiac development, and this can lead to long-term cardiometabolic diseases on long-term basis. So these are mainly proven through animal studies, basically. But this has a very well relevance in humans as well. So there are various researches still ongoing looking at how the intrauterine exposure affects the long-term cardiometabolic health. And then again, coming to an important aspect of obesity, as you know, obesity has become the most common chronic illness in children. It's already been proven in US, and it is becoming the most common chronic illness across the globe among children. So this is a very bit of an old paper. I think all of you are aware about the fact that breastfeeding has a definite role in protection against obesity. So again, this is a meta-analysis which has around more than 2 lakh of study population, and the concept has been proven very well that breastfeeding has a role in protection against obesity. So this is another very recent literature which was quite interesting, and it's been published from Europe, and the data has been collected from around 5 European countries, include Germany, Italy, etc. And this is a multi-centric double-blinded randomized controlled trial, which they have analyzed the effect of lower protein content versus high protein content in infant formulas and their effect on obesity at school age children. So the sample size was around more than 1,000, and all the formula, they have selected all the formula fed infants, and they were randomly assigned into those who receive high protein content and low protein content in the first 1 year of life. And they have followed up all these babies until 6 years of age, and they have calculated the BMI at 6 years of age, and studied the association between high protein content formulas and low protein content formulas. So it was very impressive to see the result that infant formula with a lower protein content reduces BMI and obesity risk at school age. So in the study, the high protein content formula include protein content around 14 gram and 18 gram at 3 months of age and 6 months of age respectively. And the lower protein content includes formulas which has 9 gram and 10 gram of proteins per day at 3 and 6 months of age respectively. So avoidance of infant foods that provide excessive protein intake could contribute to a reduction in childhood obesity. So this was a very well conducted clinical trial, and which was very eye-opening clinical trial. And as you know, and as we all know, people, what family needs a very rapid weight gain in the first 1 year of life. What they ask for is there anything which is giving a very high protein and very high calories, which they can supplement to their child? And this, there is an evidence now, you can see that very high protein intake may not be beneficial for children in long run. Also, this study identifies weight gain during the first year of life can be one of the predictors for later obesity. So very rapid weight gain in the first year of life may be a contributory factor towards obesity. So how it is so that in the more rapid weight gain in infants is mediated mainly through secretion of insulins and insulin-like growth factors. And when there are high concentrations of insulin and insulin-1 growth factors in formula-fed infants or high protein contented food intake, this can lead to later life obesity and things. So the protein quantity is an important factor when we advise nutrition to our children. So then, is it audible now? Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You
Yeah.
are audible.
I was just wondering. Yeah. Okay. So again, when I was looking at a few recent literatures which says nutrition and behavioral development of children. So we know diet is a very modifiable risk factor that may influence behavioral development on long-term basis. So we can lot of existing researchers that focused on nutrient-specific association and behavioral development. So, early childhood is a very critical period for behavioral and emotional development, and this has a lot of long-term implications for psychosocial functioning in adult life, adolescence, and in all age groups. So, any adverse behavioral symptoms that may emerge during this time, this may be an indicator for later mental health. So this is another study which is published from Canada and very recently in an year, which looks at ultra-processed food consumption and the behavioral outcomes. And this is a very well-conducted prospective study, and the sample size included more than around 2,000 children. And they have looked at association between high ultra-processed food intake and adverse behavioral and mental health outcomes, especially in adults and adolescents. And they have looked into this behavioral and mental outcomes through a behavioral checklist called a CBCL scoring equipment, and they have rated. So to say about ultra processed food, this study basically came from Canada, and they identify 48% of their preschool children has consumption of ultra processed foods as energy intake. So these food, as you know, the ultra processed foods, they are used a lot of additives to increase palatability, to increase shelf life, and obviously it's for profit making. So maybe the food is convenient, maybe affordable, and we will have a microbiological safety. What are the problems? Mainly they are highly energy dense, and they are having high content of sugar, saturated fat, and high sodium, and they're very low in fiber and essential nutrients. So these are the study results, and it is very well proven that. And but another important factor in this study is that they have at some point they have evaluated the children, and they have collected data on the intake of ultra processed food, and they have introduced the minimal processed food, and they have again reviewed the children for their improvement in the scores. So in this prospective study, it is shown that higher ultra-processed food intake at 3 years of age was associated with the adverse behavioral and emotional symptoms at 5 years of age. And substitution of minimal processed food with ultra-processed food, ultra-processed, it's ulta. Substitution of minimally processed food was associated with the lower CBCL scores on follow-up. So the study concludes that encouraging minimally processed food may help to support childhood behavioral, emotional, and better mental health development over the next few years. So this is again we can see. I think if you could see that, you can see the ultra processed food intake, and you can see the scores on the higher side, and when it is substituted with the minimal processed food, the scores is coming on the lower side, and they have clearly mentioned an association in the behavioral outcomes. So something of similar study, which previously published from Europe again, which has looked at junk food diet and a behavioral problem in children. And this study, this is quite an old study anyway, it's published in 2007. And they have proven that one standard deviation increase in junk food intake at 4.5 years of age was associated with increased hyperactivity by age 7. So all this studies also had a sample sizes around 4,000 children, and all these studies point towards how the early life nutrition shapes a child's long-term life in behavioral health and growth aspects. So maybe I think am I exceeding time? One more, I just finish with one more study. Is that okay?
Ma'am, it's okay if you can conclude in another 1 minute. Is that okay with
Sure,
you?
sure. Yeah, fine. This is another, I think this study is also very impressive, saying that this is study looking at the relationship between brain myelination and nutrient intake. And you can see the nutrients studied are, it's a huge sample size, and studies published from Switzerland. And they have looked into all the components of the food. They have meticulously looked into the amounts of phospholipids, choline, and gangliosides, oligonucleosides, protein, carbohydrates, and all those things. And they have found out that there was a positive correlation between nutrient intake and brain myelination in all the age groups. And it is maximum during the initial 6 months to 20 months of age group and compared to other age group. So it shows that a proper nutrient intake is very well associated with the brain myelination and proper development. So these are the maybe another one more study, and this is just nothing. This is a study with more than 1 million sample size, but it's a retrospective study. They have compared the growth trajectories in infants from families who are taking vegan based diet versus omnivorous diet, and what they found is there is no statistically significant difference between the growth between the two families, those who take vegan diet versus omnivorous diet, but there was a mild weight and high difference was there, but it was not statistically significant. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk. I think these studies lay a big foundation for our future practices. So early nutrition is not just about growth. It shapes lifelong brain function and socioeconomic outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the insightful session. It is really important. Now I just want to correct myself, not the 1,000 days, but the 2,000 days of life, and the role of nutrition truly set a strong scientific foundation. And it is really matching with today's theme. And we are grateful for your valuable insights. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Participants, we are going to take all the question answer sessions after the end of all the 3 sessions. So moving ahead to the next session, our next session, which complements today's theme, is Healthy Beginnings, where tradition meets nutrition science. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Priya Chitle, Chief Clinical Dietitian, HOD, Apollo Hospital, Indore. She is an experienced professional with over 2 decades of expertise in clinical nutrition and dietetics. She has undergone specialized training in low FODMAP diet and holds certifications in renal, bariatric, infection control, and autism awareness nutrition. She is also a BPNI certified lactation counselor and a certified master trainer in diabetes education. She has made significant contributions through publications, book chapters, and digital nutrition education tools in clinical practice and community outreach. A recipient of several awards in research and clinical dietetics, she is also an active member of professional bodies like IDA and IAP in India and serves on the pediatric core group as well. I now invite Dr. Priya to share her insights on Healthy Beginnings, where tradition meets nutrition science. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Arundhati ma'am. It's an honor and a privilege to be associated and get collaborated. Give me a minute to share my screen. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I thank the Navi Mumbai chapter, Dr. Varsha and Fatima madam, and a big thank you to Lekha madam for giving this platform. And it's an honor from the entire pediatric nutrition core group to collaborate for such a wonderfully curated agenda for the World Health Day. So as we know, Dr. Anuja shared that a healthy beginning is for the lifetime. So we'll be discussing healthy beginning in the Indian context, bridging tradition, practice, and modern nutrition science. As practicing dietitians, we often find ourselves balancing cultural beliefs with clinical evidence. Madam has shown us a lot of papers where the entire thing was about fast food, junk food, and she also shared that the next generation, how they want the evidence and how they are after our life. I thank my stars when my child was in a weaning age, that time the network was not that approachable for him as such. So we know that 1,000 days are very important, and it's a critical window. But as Madam rightly said, it is not just the 1,000 days; it is now 2,000 days. During this period, nutrition influences not just the growth, but also epigenetic programming, immune system development, and gut microbiome establishment. Madam showed that early nutrition plays a major role in determining future risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, along with cognitive outcomes. The next speaker will be sharing detail on this particular aspect of behavior. So when we counsel during this phase or this stage of life, we are not just addressing the immediate nutrition as such, but we are shaping the lifelong health. When we talk about Indian nutrition landscape, while we have seen improvement in breastfeeding initiatives, exclusive breastfeeding often declines after 3 to 4 months. That's a normal thing that we see in the OPDs. Complementary feeding practices are frequently inadequate with low diet diversity and poor nutrient density. Though they are giving the feeds, whatever is being advised to them, but still the nutrient density or the quality of that particular feed is not sufficient for the kids for their overall growth. Recent studies also show that many infants do not meet the minimum acceptable diet criteria. This indicates that the gap lies not only in the awareness, but the effective implementation of whatever is being advised to them. So rising childhood obesity and still anemia prevalence is still there in pediatric age group. Now, what are the strength of the traditional practices or traditional diet that we see? Many traditional Indian practices are actually supported by modern science. If we look into it, like colostrum feeding plays a key role in immunity development. Fermented foods like idli, dosa, khaman improves gut health and mineral absorption. Seasonal and regional diets naturally enhances diet diversity. So instead of dismissing traditions as such, we should identify and reinforce what is scientifically beneficial. We have to balance what is best and what needs to be improvised. So when we talk about the gaps or the practices that needs correction are prelactal feeds. Those guttis should be stopped immediately. They increases the infection risk and delays breastfeeding. Delaying complementary feeding can lead to growth faltering. Diluted foods reduce energy and nutrient intake. Though they start the feed, but most of the house we see that they are diluting it, just thinking that probably the kid will have a swallowing issue or he'll not be able to digest that. Early introduction of cow's milk increases the risk of iron deficiency that we all know. And hence, our role is to correct these practices in a culturally sensitive manner. If you are going to tell something which is not being acceptable in their culture, probably it will be difficult for you to convince the entire family as such. So what are the complementary feeding gaps that we see? In practice, we often see infants being fed frequently, but the quality of feeding is inadequate. Foods are often low in energy and protein as such. They'll not add any dal to it, or they'll just give wheat lapsi. There's no protein to it. So texture progression is delayed, thinking that there will be a swallowing difficulty, teething difficulty. Probably the kid won't be able to chew it properly. It affects both the intake and the development. This is why many children remain undernourished despite regular feeding. The feeding is there, however, the nutrient density is still not sufficient for that age group. So processed baby foods, that is mostly it is convenience-driven choice that is basically needs to be addressed. Marketing influences more. There's a lot of high sugar and salt exposure. However, currently we see that the pediatricians are convincing the parents that they should stop giving sugar and there shouldn't be any salt to their the kids' diet. But it is from when to start all this is still a challenge. The dependency on convenience food and awareness is more. We need to guide families to a healthier and evidence-based alternative. Taste conditioning is still required. You still have to explain to the new mother that whatever you are feeding the child, you have to first taste it and then give it to understand and be confident what you are feeding your child. So bridging the model is about retaining, modifying, and replacing. We retain beneficial practice like homemade cooking. We modify them by improving nutrient density, for example, adding protein sources of healthy fat sources to the kids' meals. And we replace less healthy options such as excessive packaged food with better alternatives. ARFs can be introduced rather than the foods that are easy for the mothers to prepare. This allows to respect the culture while ensuring optimal nutrition. Now, when we talk about complementary feeding, we should understand that it should start after completion of the 6 months. Consistency, energy density, and should have enough of protein and requirement of iron and rest of the microminerals should also be considered. We should understand the importance of gut microbiome. It plays a crucial role in immunity and metabolism. Breastfeeding supports beneficial bacteria, and traditional fiber-rich and fermented foods further promote the gut health. So many Indian dietary practices are naturally aligned with modern microbiome science, but only when we emphasize more on that. When we talk about maternal nutrition, as Madam shared a lot of papers where maternal nutrition is crucial for the NCDs for the next generation. Conditions like anemia can lead to poor birth outcomes. Improving maternal nutrition has a direct impact on the child's growth and development. We all have been reading from our MSc days to still when we are practicing. So our approach should always include both the mother and the child when we are doing the counseling. It cannot be just about the mother. It cannot be just about the kid. It has to be in sync, and also the family members should also be included. So personalized application is what we will have to consider when we are prescribing a plan for them. In real life scenarios, we recommend our recommendations need to be more practical. For working mothers, we can suggest expressed breast milk, which is still not practiced the way it should be. They still have doubt whether if we keep the expressed milk at room temperature or in the fridge, how long they can store it, in what container they have to store it. For rural settings, we can use locally available foods to improve diet diversity instead of just asking them, or we see that the mother will send the kid to the shop and ask simple biscuit ka packet would be their breakfast. Also, postpartum nutrition, we should focus on balance rather than excess of anything. It is not just the weight or a chubby cheek of a child that should be considered. Overall development is very important. The goal is to make nutrition sustainable and realistic whenever we are doing the counseling. So when we talk about the role of dietitian, we play a crucial role in bridging science and culture. We translate evidence into practical advice and correct myths without dismissing the traditions. Our goal is to provide personalized and culturally appropriate nutrition guidance. So to conclude, the future of Indian nutrition lies not only in replacing traditions, but it is scientifically refining them. By doing so, we can significantly improve long-term and intergenerational health outcomes. Thank you so much. And as Madam said, we would be taking the questions after this session. So it is a very appropriate quote that I saw it. The destiny of the nation depends on how they nourish themselves. So probably it is all about starting early and maintaining it throughout. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the enlightening session, and special thanks that you have concluded within time, actually before time.
So you should have more video for the question and answers. We have good faculties with us, Dr. Anu and Dr. Shripriya. So I think we'll have more of question and answers.
Yes. Yes, ma'am, sure. So that was a very enlightening session where you have highlighted many points, like starting from importance of the traditional food, the importance of maternal nutrition, both pre and then postpartum nutrition, strengthening the gut microbiota, diet diversity, and many more things you have highlighted that they should practice, and that helps in overall healthy growth and development of the child, as well as for the nutrition of the health of the mother. As we move forward, we now have another very extremely important dimension of early nutrition, its impact beyond physical growth. So our next session is on how early feeding practices shape eating behavior, cognition, and mental health. This topic brings together nutrition and psychology, both the aspects, helping us to understand how early experiences with food can influence not just eating habits, but also the brain development. So it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Shripriya Shaji. Dr. Shaji holds an MSc in Nutrition and Dietetics and a PhD in Psychology. Uniquely positioning her at the intersection of nutrition and mental health together. She holds the prestigious SCOPE certification, a global gold standard in obesity management, and is among the very few professions in India and uniquely a psychologist to achieve this distinction. She is also certified in nutrition psychology from the Center for Nutritional Psychology and has achieved 100% score in disordered eating management in GI disorders, along with distinction in low food map diet therapy. In addition, she holds a diploma in art therapy and plays key leadership roles as founder and secretary of the Community Nutrition Forum, Kerala, and chief program officer of the Neuro Nutrition Core Group at IAPN India. She also contributes as a co-editor of Mind Matters International magazine. May I now invite Dr. Shripriya Shaji ma'am to take this session ahead. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Arundhati ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Very good evening and wonderful day for everyone. So today, as Arundhati ma'am has said, we have always spoken about diet. Today we are going to the different perspective, which is all about how early feeding is going to impact the change. So I have brought in a case vignette here. The boy who is 22. I know today we are talking about pediatrics still. I have brought him at the age of 22, engineering graduate. He is having a continuous night shift, and you can see him always munching around his work table. So when I ask him about how is your hunger, whether you are really hungry, ma'am, can you please switch your unmute yourself, mute yourself? Thank you. So he never felt hunger in years. This is what we are seeing over years, and I can really say it has started generations, years. We cannot only call or claim today's generation. It has started at least 4 decades before. And today at 22, this boy is doesn't know what hunger is. He eats because he is tired, he is stressed, he is distracted, he is having emotional troubles and traumas. And this has a long relationship with our rat race cycle. Every one of us are going. I have given a financial struggle picture here, but when we say money doesn't make everything, but money is making us run behind everything, and we are forgetting our core value of how we are building ourselves, including our financial management. And if you think the story started today, I'm very sorry to say the story has started much, much earlier. Every one of us who is traveling by train, who is going by a public transportation, in our neighbor's home, and yes, even in our own homes, we are witnessing this, the stories of feeding with Cocomelon or whatever might be, right? I remember getting feeded with the Chandamama. Even today, there is a culture of Chitra Paurnami is there. on the Chaitra Purnima day, we go eat in front of the river and eat in front of the moon god and blah blah. But today we don't even go to our own terrace, but we are all in front of the global window and watching the world every minute. Even we are not watching our own food, isn't it? Mindless scrolling has emptied our mindfulness. So let's see how this feeding behaviors and practices is going to impact our behavior, our cognition, and mental health. I think already Dr. Anu ma'am has covered most of the things. Still, I'll just brush some of the important points. So as she said, in this boy's case at the 22, not only this boy, many of us are witnessing the thermostat of obesity and cardiovascular risk trajectory is very high. The health trajectory is going like very, very low across India, and especially our state, Kerala is really leading in all kind of non-communicable diseases, and that doesn't mean every other state are very healthy. Everybody is following in just a 0.1 to 2.3 differences. So Indians are going to this trajectory of non-communicable diseases, and 90% of our children are obese at the age. Here I have to say this, India was struggling around malnutrition for years and years. The government has spent a lot. Today, we are again in the position, still after 75 years of independence, we are still spending on malnutrition or malnourishment. I can say it is again a overnourishment, but here the nourishment is imbalanced and still micronutrient deficiencies exist. So why and what makes this important with the development, overall development? Very important. The gut dysbiosis is on the lead, and this is the very important connection with all the healthy issues. We can say gut-brain axis, gut-liver axis, gut-heart cardio axis, and every axis are directly connected with the gut axis. What happens here, our immune system or your microbiota signaling is producing the active neurotransmitters, which is directly influencing the brain maturation and the metabolic feedbacks like the intestinal hormones, especially GLP-1 and peptide gamma, provide the critical real-time signals, hemostatic satiety, and other issues. This starts the immune priming from the very early stages of the birth. So the gut-brain axis, the engine of electrolytes and all those actinobacteria actively digest this human eating procedures, and this is how the developmental blueprint is shaping the mood, emotions, and our health. Okay, so here what lacks very commonly with the overall development or with the overnutrition, even in the malnourishment we have the same problem, and even in the overnutrition we have the same problem still existing, is the macronutrients are imbalanced and the micronutrients are deficient. This micronutrients are the very important foundation of the cognitive development, as I think doctor has spoken about it, even Priya ma'am has spoken about it on the myelination and the neurogenesis process. The cost of this IUGR children with the growth restriction and their score is deficient, long-term developmental issues are very common. And this linear growth and IQ, like growth rate before 12 months, significantly predicts their IQ at the age of 9. And sufficiency of iron, zinc, and iodine is the absolute biological foundation for the rapid myelination and neurogenesis. So again, the clinical trajectory is very important from the early childhood pickiness, how it escalates into the clinical risk zone. The studies are saying that the clinically vulnerability, like persistent picky eaters, are more prevalent to face significantly higher risk of being clinically underweight, and their psychological links like extreme and persistent selectivity is strongly linked to their pervasive developmental problems like heightened anxiety and future behavioral distributions or disturbances or very common. So this is the risk zone. So what happens with the feeding style? What are the two types of feedings? We call two types of feeding, responsive and non-responsive. How it impacts clinically? The locus of control like internally relies on the child's energy regulation and volume adjustment with the responsive feeding style, where in non-responsive it is external and relies on the tactics like parental enforcement or portion control and kind of things. The responsive style is mostly on the cue-based promise, like when you feel hungry, you eat. It is not that it is time to eat. It is like when you have to eat. After this, you can watch movie. That kind of non-responsive feeding patterns or controlling the child or defining their mind mapping and changing their hunger cues also. So what happens to the laterogenic effects fosters the secure attachment with the responsive feeding, whereas in the non-responsive, they have the heightened risk of food refusal. Maybe at the age of 6 or 7, they will not refuse. At the age of 14 or 20, they will just ignore what is good, bad. They will just go how they wanted to go about. So the clinical outcome becomes in the non-responsive, it drives the behavioral disinhibition, and there will be the actual absence of hunger. That is what we are seeing in many cases, the night binge eaters. The night binge eaters are really high in today's world. If we take a prevalence study, India will again lead in this night binging. Every part of Indian cities have night hotels, and Swiggies are selling very high in the night binging. So moving again to the hijacking, what is making the hijacking reward pathways? How is this? Neurobiology is directly connected with the ultra processed foods. This wholesome foods will balance the dopamine loop system. It signals the satiety, leptin and insulin intact. If you eat a real breakfast, you will understand how the natural activation and the next meal hunger is there. Whereas if you are going to skip your meal or going to have a smoothies or meal replacement, the intense hedonic override will be there, intense rewarding stimuli and bypass of the hemostatic inhibition and downregulation of the D2 receptor, that especially very high in addiction signature. The addiction is not only food addiction, it may go up to the drug addiction, and because of the hypersatiety signals and poor hyperpalatability. So what happens and why the screen time becomes the another important thing when the mindless scrolling is going to hijack their attention pathway. It is hijacking the attention pathway. The actual natural satiety is not there. The intact of homeostatic signaling will be reduced, and decoupled signaling like satiety, like media distraction, absurd fullness, or sometimes extending the meal duration or increasing the intake, whatever they like more or whatever they feel okay to eat with, whatever is okay with the texture, these were all going to change. And this attentional hijack is not only stopping with one kind of addiction, it might be going to different types of addiction loops. So even a single 30-second advertisement has the impact and preference. Like I have recently seen reels in internet where a man is cutting a mango, and the child watching the reel of cutting the mango is really started ruling. This we have studied in the Pavlov's dog principle. The same restoring satiety is not possible over a time with the attention hijack. So what the biological architect should be, as Dr. was insisting on the first 1,000 days, the golden window period is the rapid myelination and hippocampal growth period. In this period, the structural deficits like protein energy restrictions and all those things will result in smaller or overall brain volume and simplified dendritic architecture. So what happens to the irreversible consequences of nutritional deficits during this highly specific critical windows can lead to the permanent irreversible alterations in brain functional circuits. So where this starts from the modern, not just modern shift, this traditional repository also we used to hear, our great grandmothers used to say that don't deviate, don't show the dog, make them sit inside the house and make them eat looking at the plate. They even don't allowed us to talk during our meal time. But today we are totally like completely, I have like every time we go in the train, I really feel bad for these children because once they started crying, immediately the cocomelon starts and they were given that. They are not even allowed to cry. They are not even allowed to act like they are in a different atmosphere. The train is a different atmosphere. I'm not comfortable to eat here. Even that cry is not allowed. They were dumped with the social media as well as dumped with the food. So this passive digital sedation, the digital distraction is actually actively decoupling the physical eating experience from the biological satiety, and the double burden is also now driven by the ultra processed foods, which is calling the hidden hunger, the undernutrition of the micronutrients, and the every client we see today with their cognitive biases or brain fog, we can see the underlying uh, micronutrient deficiencies. So what is the responsive feeding? How can we define it? The cue-based response, like caregivers recognize the prompt, let the infant or the child or the toddler ask for the food, let them understand they are really hungry and use the signaling communication, building trust. This we have to educate as a caregiver, sorry, as a allied healthcare professionals, we have to every time educate a mother, father on this cue-based response. And this responsive feeding supports the autonomy of every child and it makes them self-regulated, not only in their energy intake, also in the appetite thermostat and the mental and cognitive, especially emotional growth. It gives a secure attachment with their responsive parenting system, fosters the interactions and sensitive reciprocal with the psychological developments, and the global standards like the WHO are reinforcing from the 6 months to 23 months as the evidence-based ensuring standard for ensuring optimal growth and long-term behavioral health outcomes. So this has to be followed and educated by every dietitian. So not just their health, emotion, and cognition, even their taste or shaped, their preferences are changed and they move on to the different type of ultra processed, their texture, like once they start eating the unhealthy, it will become a real difficult for them to get back to the healthy or normal food. So which is the critical window to open this, that is 6 months. Once we start weaning, we have the neural plasticity will be developing, the taste preferences starts, they are really blank, they don't know what is sweet or salt. They as such start accepting the food with the taste you have given. But now what happens, the weaning foods are becoming the very flavored. Everybody, every parent goes for some flavor and they say, even for milk, they are going for flavored milk and they say they will like this flavor, the of curd and all those things. This is increasing the neophobia, which is the instinctive rejection of novel or unfamiliar food. In earlier days, it existed. Yes, because it was the survival mechanism. But today it has become the obesogenic environmental equation. And the modern risk is the reduced dietary variety, and children are not willing to, even normal children, when they come to us with the parental anxiety, with the underweight and all those things, we even see this rise of neophobia without autism or without any neurodeficient. We can see them very picky and very sensitive to the food system. So neophobia doesn't allow them to increase the diversity, which may again change the alter the dysbiosis. And they what becomes high is at the toddler phase they started saying no to the wide variety of vegetables, fruits. They only eat. I often get to see the child mother saying that they don't eat anything except the rice with some papad or rice with some char. Char is just a gravy. So this neophobic children, the research reveals that their consumption of vegetables and fruits and higher reliances on energy dense foods like chips, puffs, and other junky snacks is very high, and thus is causing the long-term consequences. So the critical window expose the good and variety of foods from the weaning period start. In the real weaning period, IAP also is saying like from 6 months you should start different types of foods and try to include all foods by the 12th month to 24th month. So the food selectivity, we have to sit as a family and we have to psychologically define this kind of fussiness or pickiness is not a right attitude or right behavior, right value system. And very important, the long breastfeeding and the later introduction like pattern has a very interesting nuance study I have come across is it is positively associated with the greater liking for nutrient rich foods. So the breastfeeding they are reinforcing, and also the introduction of food patterns according to age appropriate food patterns is very, very important. And beyond the taste, texture also matters. The texture helps them like understand their unfavorable textures and don't give unfavorable textures. And we should understand not every time the no is just a kind of their rejection or adamancy. It is also their biology of coping. So understand the sensitive period and resistant complex textures should be taken care of. Proper guidance to the parent as well the child should be given, and the texture can be reinforced in the period of 3 to 6 months. So these are the 5 important key principles for the healthcare professionals we have to reinforce, not only for our children, also for the children we see everyday practice. Prioritize the parent, educate them on the responsive feeding methods, eliminate the screen feeding system, strongly like say no to this. And as a mother, I can proudly say I have totally even not touched my phone for my own purposes till the age of 3 for my son. So you also start avoiding the screen time unless it is really required. We know when it is important. And promote wholesome food quality, address the parental anxiety, because today many of them are like working mothers and their exposure to children, like earlier we had a next aunties and their children. We have been seeing children in the 13-14 years. Now today it is not like that. Every family has 2 children and they became auntie at the age of 29 or 30. So they child growing or developing stages are really anxious. So comfort them, give them the feeding exercises and advices, and also the infodemics, you have to talk to them and understand what they are undergoing, and monitor the persistent pickiness, like which is all the red flag or above the age of 3 to 6 years. So what are the strategic takeaways for today? From the clinical level, intervention must be optimized systematically, screen for the maternal and infant nutrition deficiency like iron, zinc, and food insecurity during the first 1,000 days. And do not just prescribe diets, actively address the family feeding climates. And for the household level division of responsibility, we have to counsel on them, parents control and structure, what is the food offered, and whether the children control the execution, whether to eat or how to eat, what I want to eat, and all those things. The choices, I always tell to my son as well as my every kid who come to me, I'll always tell, food is never a choice to select. Food is always a blessing. You should accept it as it is and eat the right food. There is no bad food when nature is made, and there is no good food when it is human transformed. So always understand what you eat and relinquish the control. Protect the child's innate satiety regulations and the biological blueprints. So this is the golden opportunity. We are not just feeding the child, we are building their brain and safeguarding the future of every child. So this is as a dietitian or as a mother, I would say, before the sugar writes the stories in their blood and screen steals the rhythm of their breath. Do not trade childhood for convenience nor health for habits that whisper harm. These small choices grow into lifelong storms. Let them live, not just grow. Let prevention begin in our love. Thank you for the patient listening.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful session. and very insightful. You have highlighted so many practical problems that actually today's parents face regarding feeding practices and how correctly they should be doing it. Thank you so much for the wonderful session. Thank you. Now, the forum is open for question, answer, and any discussions. If anyone wanted to share their any views, they can. We are like we love to hear from you all. And if you have any questions, you can directly ask. You can unmute yourself, directly ask, or you can also write it in the chat box. All our three speakers are here. They are here to answer your queries if you have any.
I would like to say thank you to Dr. Anu and Dr. Shripriya. I really like that poem of hers that you shared in the last. I was trying to capture that, but unfortunately, best please do share it in the group.
Yeah, ma'am. I'll send it to you.
Sure.
Yeah. It was a very excellent talk by Dr. Priya and Dr. Shripriya, covering all the practical aspects which we see in Indian children and in our regular setup. So I know both of you are going to talk about all the practical scenarios, so I just kept myself for the research aspect. I think it's not too much over for you and all. Yeah. But yeah, anyway.
That's good to know, ma'am, because ultimately it's all about evidence. Without that, we cannot do our routine practice. Hi, Lekha ma'am. Namaste.
Hi,
So
namaste.
good to have you. Now
Yeah,
everybody
sorry,
can
I missed you a
ask all
few
the questions
sections.
easier.
I just joined towards the end, just saw Sri Priya's poem. That's it. I'm very sorry. Was it another section?
मैं बच गई.
No. You are the speakers. Sri Priya, just a doubt from my end.
Yes, ma'am.
There are parents who comes up telling, we are trying to feed the child and the baby is not eating. What do you tell for them? How do you handle it?
Yes, ma'am. Like every day, I have at least two to three people coming and saying this. To be in a typical Kerala setup, they'll say, "Avarkadu ishtalla, mooparkadu kaikilla." So that means the child dislikes it. The child's autonomy is like they doesn't like or they doesn't want. The another biggest problem we have is the grandparents or elders says allow them to eat whatever they want. I always tell in my sessions, it is not like the child should take the ownership now. You are the owners, you are the responsible person for the child. Every parent is responsible for the eating behavior of the child, what we decide. So, what I make a very practical suggestion at the age of 6 months, you start feeding, you just feed your child. That's okay because in Indian tradition, even at the age of 43, I love to like when my mom give me a food. But that is totally a different story. You feed out of love is different, and when it is required, like for during the child is feeling sick, or sometimes when they need the emotional security. But from the 6th month, make the child sit next to you with the meal time and you eat. So I always have this one play in my sessions with the parents. So we'll have a small play. Just can you all touch your chin? Can you all touch your chin? So you all touched here? Is this the chin? So the child observes us and practices what we do. Okay? So the child observes you. You eat. You tell them that there is nothing more important than a right food. We are all, after all, running for survival, and you show them. You practice it every day from your home. Sit 30 minutes for your lunch, 40 minutes for your lunch. Relax, move away your phone. Sit along with them. And you show by eating yourself. Like the child doesn't like the bitter gourd because I don't like it too. It should not be the way. I get the food as a blessing, and you follow the system, the child will automatically start following. If it is too late during the adolescent, it is very difficult. No, not at all. At any time, your child will be looking back to you. Even at the 43, if there is some problem, I'll immediately turn what my mother did, what my grandmother did. This is how our brain is designed. We will immediately turn to our family environment, our teachers. So you show them how to do that. That is what I generally answer, ma'am.
Thank you, Shri Priya.
Okay, ma'am.
It's a common problem that we often face, ma'am, here. From 7 months onwards, they'll say the child is not liking this. The kid won't eat this. We always have to tell the taste and liking is developed by the parents and not the kid. It is how you handle the expressions when you are feeding the child.
Yes, yes. Actually, one interesting thing I heard from Dr. Kadarwali, who is called as Millet Man of India, he says that the taste of choice, like when I was child, I had been fed with millets. So today I don't like any other junk food, sir. To be honest, whenever I open this packet of Lays, I cannot really accept that smell of the Lays because we are not used to that. So this one choice we make, many times I tell mothers, like, don't accept or compromise with the food you give. You should not compromise. You should say this is the child's right, and whatever may cost. Plan. It takes, even we are working professionals, even I am a working woman, it takes a little time to plan for our family's health. It is the health of all 4 or 5 of us, or 6 of us, or 3 of us, whatever it may be. A little planning, because we are leading anything. We can even go to moon today. Women can do anything. And letting planning in our kitchen is very easy thing if we really show some interest towards the health.
Ma'am, can I add something to it? Because I'm a mother of 2 sons, and I have seen that if we can involve them while preparing the meal, small things like just peeling some vegetables or doing something or just watching us cooking, they tend to get interested in that, and then like then they can have something like a paratha and sabji instead of pizza because they are involved in making those things. So even including these things and also including some aspects in the education also, somewhere it is going to build up those healthy habits in child.
Exactly, ma'am. This also I tell to the neuronutrition, neurodivergent kids of ours, like share the responsibility with them. The joy of I did it, even if they are just going to pluck some mint leaves or coriander leaves, they will start telling, I made it, I made it, I made it. So that brings the responsibility of having that food. That is another technique we really use. Thank you for reminding that. And also like sharing the responsibility of cleaning and all those things as a joy, not as a compulsion. It is like, it is your duty, you should clean the table. It is your duty, you should bring water. Nothing like that. Come, let's do together. Let's have fun together. A mama will do one thing and you will do another thing. So that kind of making the things by all of us together may bring more joy of this dining time.
Ma'am, can I add a little one point? Yes.
ma'am.
So I think that when the age pass, it's a adolescent age, around beyond 14, 15 years above, then if we have missed to develop the habits in the kids due to some reason during the adolescent age, one point I always ask my child, I always make them understand with the knowledge, with the reason, excuse why I'm telling this, why this is bad, why this is good. Many times these only help out my kids, my children even, जो younger one है तो and elder one even, कि नहीं ये ममा ने बोला है, this is the reason, so this is actually matters. He goes to read it and apply it very fast and very quickly. So knowledge, I think, even work in a पॉजिटिव वे एंड कंसिस्टेंट, कि वो लोग फिर वो हैबिट को भूलते ही नहीं है. So yes, with this मदर को मिमिक करते हैं बच्चे, मदर के साथ, मदर को बैठ के जैसे आप दोनों डॉक्टर्स ने बोला है, that also works. And this is also one point I have seen in my daily routine कि बच्चे को अगर नॉलेज देते हैं न्यूट्रिशन का, तो वो लोग अपने आप ही इसको अप्लाई करते हैं.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, there is a question for you, all three of you, whoever wanted to answer. So these days, so many celiac kids are seen, like celiac disease is nowadays very commonly we have seen in the clinic. So any reason why suddenly we are seeing so many cases of celiac disease?
Yeah,
Madam,
maybe
you can highlight, yeah.
where is, I mean, I think the practitioner is from which place basically? Actually, this is having a belt in India. Celiac disease is not seen in all part of India. Mainly it is seen in the Rajasthan belt and part of north. So in that area it is very common. I think it is more awareness and we are diagnosing more because of our awareness is more. It has been there for a long time and it has been a reason for undernutrition and a lot of health issues which has not been diagnosed very frequently like this before. Maybe because of that. And in southern part of India, like in Tamil Nadu or in Kerala, we are not even seeing a single celiac disease because it's having a very big genetic predisposition.
Practitioner is from Punjab, so she's saying there are many.
Yeah, it's very common basically. Yeah, in that area. Maybe we are diagnosing it properly at this era basically. I think so.
Ma'am, can inflammation may be the reason, the maternal inflammation, the women is overweight and she is carrying diabetic or insulin resistant during her pregnancy? That may be also a reason for celiac disease or the lactose intolerance in the north.
Actually, there are a lot of environmental factors which can contribute, but still there is a genetic predisposition as well. So this can contribute definitely, but we cannot say it's only because of the environmental exposure because we are not seeing it everywhere. So those individuals who are predisposed, there can be other contributory factors as well, basically. So I think it's maybe because we are diagnosing it more and more nowadays because of our increased awareness.
Actually, in Gurgaon area, people used to, even the women, they used to have too much of alcohol. So it start from the Friday night and they, have party till Sunday morning or the Monday morning. So during their, the young, before their pregnancy, they used to have all these kind of alcohols and smoking, or they are passive smokers. And during their pregnancy only, they believe or they have healthy foods. So may this contribute in the...
See, definitely all these have a role. So all the state of alcoholism or a high insulin form or high insulin resistance, all this create a micro-inflammatory response in our body. So if you're predisposed to develop some inflammatory conditions or some diseases, all these are add-on facts. So all this can contribute to the development or more phenotypic expression of such diseases in our body. So all these kind of situations like even obesity, even alcoholism, or even undernutrition, malnutrition, all these are a chronic inflammatory state because there is imbalance, the homeostatic imbalance happening in our body. See, all it may not be directly linked, but all these are associated basically.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So in my practice, every day I'm seeing a child even from 4 year, 5 year coming with fatty liver disease. with the enzyme elevation, and definitely it's become a big concern, especially in Kerala, because currently I'm practicing in Kerala, and I can even see 5 or 6-year-old children coming with obesity and fatty liver. I'm literally start worrying about the thing, and whatever actually Dr. Sripriya was telling, it is very important to have a good diet nutrition practice from the very early life, because once these children are exposed to this kind of very tasty palatable kind of food, then they won't take other foods, they don't take homemade foods. So the excuse from parents is the child does not take any homemade food because the child is not eating the whole day. They naturally tend to buy outside foods and junk foods to the children. So it's very important to introduce a healthy habit from the very beginning. So I think that the role of clinical nutritionists or the role of pediatricians is very important in preventing such a rapid increase in this metabolic disorders. Basically, we should be very cautious about such a thing.
There is a message also in the group, sorry, chat box. They are saying that many times trends overrides the knowledge. Exactly, I agree with you, because children come to us. Even yesterday, I had a 16-year-old girl who is doing a one meal a day system. I have to teach her and educate her about her growth still is there and all those things. True, and where this lacks is that early education is lacking. So when the lady comes for the pregnancy, their dietitian should start educating the mother. Once they come in for the pregnancy education, we have to start the education right from there, not only for you, your child, your childbearing phase, and the first 2 years. As rightly mentioned, the first 2000 days, we have to continuously reinforce the practice. And when we bring in a strong family values, we have strong family values for many other things, even financial. We'll say we will have to earn like this, do like this, and all those things. We have to hereafter, furthermore, moving, like we have to set a strong food values to our generations. That is very important. We have to start doing.
Shri Priya,
Definitely.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, actually, what I see in my practice, that people are overeducated or miseducated. So when we say that this you have to do, they say I already know about it, or they give two more gyan to us. So it is very difficult to counsel the parents about all these things. So they say ha pata hai, ha Instagram pe reel aaya tha, and sometimes they start sending you the reels and to justify or to do this. So how to handle this type of tricky parents who already know, or the carrying the misknowledge?
Yes, first thing we have to start enjoying all these things. First, we have to mellow down ourselves, is what I started practicing for more than 10, 15 years now. I think still I was 28, 29. I was okay with I used to tell them what is this and all those things. But once, honestly, like in our clinic, it was like a physician is there on one table, rheumatologist in the next table, and I as a psychologist and another dietitian was there. This man, I want to continuously, I was telling, don't do smoking, your family will get attacked, your grandchildren will have a positive issues and all those things. At one point of time, he was continuously saying one statement: someday I have to die. This continuously after 20 minutes, I said, I really felt, I said, okay, let's go to the terrace for a walk. He asked, why to the terrace now? Because it was mid in the afternoon. I just laughed and said, anyway, you're going to die. Let's fall today. So there are sometimes you can just make a joke about what they are not serious, and then you can pull back up. First, start understanding what is the problem, because everybody says that I'm watching this, watching that. But one thing why many of us just sit back and they say it is my me time and they use the phone is because they are lacking micronutrients. Even adults are lacking micronutrients. Even mothers, working women are lacking. Educated professionals, including us dietitians, are really starving with micronutrient deficiency. So that brings the procrastination mentality, kind of fatigue in the evening, late evening. So many houses just lay back and watch this and start learning the comfort and convenient information. So here we have to be little overdo something. You have to keep role playing yourself. Sometimes you have to laugh out at such situation and prepare the answer which can make them unlearn. This is a kind of a real cognitive technique we have to use. We have to learn some cognitive behavior therapies and start doing this in our practice. You have to tell them, yes, even I have seen that. What a wonderful joke it was. Then you tell why it is not right. You just laugh with them. You don't tell it is not wrong. And the reels, most of the time, sometimes they even come with the authentic doctors or dietitians' words. Most of the times, the reels are for 1 minute. So they give a information taking alcohol is good for heart disease. But the problem is how much alcohol, when to take, in what form to take. So this kind of information is not given to you. It has to be researched or you have to go to the right person. And I always tell my clients, the data or Google is like a library. You can enter into Kandimara library and see thousands of books in front of you. Everything will give you information. And as a teacher, I will tell you how to use the information in a rightful way. You will have a map, but only I can guide you go there. Or I can be the driver to take you there. So this is sometimes you have to make them laugh with them, enjoy with them, and then you can take them to that particular point. Maybe it needs some time within our practice, in our clinic. Sometimes we may lack time, but at least sit for 40 minutes with them for this education, because infodemics is the biggest thing, more, dangerous than pandemic now. This is killing many of us.
Totally agree.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Totally agree with you, ma'am. I think this question has been already answered in adolescent many times, the trends of overrides. So how to counsel or how to motivate those adolescents to choose the right kind of food. This, ma'am, you have already answered. So we are answered most of the questions. Is there any other question from any other participant? Anyone wanted to share anything?
I just want to sincerely thank the organizers and Priya ma'am. Dr. Priya ma'am called me for joining this session, and Dr. Anu ma'am with the very interesting. In fact, I have also collected the same researchers, and you have already briefed it. So you minimized my time. I didn't need to dig into more. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, and I have a good learning from both of you. We'll stay connected, and all of us. Thank you to all the participants with their nice wordings. So grateful.
It was a very good practical session by both of your lectures. It was very impressive. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this today, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all for the wonderful session. And all the participants for the active participation and valuable time. I hope today's session has been insightful and meaningful, and let's take these learning forward into our practices. Have a great day ahead, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much.